Good morning or good afternoon to all our participants today. Today marks our 13th MC2CM Targeted City Actions webinar series, where we present every Friday one of the 15 targeted city actions of the MC2CM project. Today, I host our implementing partners, UN Habitat, the Jordan office, and the Greater Amman municipality to present for you the action titled Safe, Inclusive, and Accessible Public Space for Social Cohesion in Marka Neighborhood, Amman. My guests today are Dr. Lubna Shaheen, Senior Urban Program Officer at UN Habitat Jordan office, and Engineer Siham Al-Hadidi, Director of Studies Design in Greater Amman Municipality. Welcome, Dr. Lubna, and welcome, Engineer Siham. We are very happy to have you here. Dr. Lubna, if I may ask you to share your screen, please, with us with a presentation. And in the meantime, I would like to remind the participants that if you would have any question, please put it in the chat box or the Q&A box, and we will ask our speakers to answer it, or you can have the microphone at the end of the session. Dr. Lubna, please go ahead. If you may give us an introduction of the context of migration in Amman, in the city of Amman, and why was the action needed at the city level?
Thank you, Fatma. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be with you today and to introduce our project like Safe, Inclusive, Accessible Public Space for Social Cohesion in Marka Neighborhood in Amman. As most of you are aware, like Jordan hosts like the biggest number of refugees, not only from like the current Syrian like crisis, but also it goes back to kind of like over like decades where like Palestinian refugees came here, Iraqi refugees, Yemeni refugees. So like it really kind of like took all the burden of hosting the floods of refugees coming to the country. So since the outbreak of the civil war, like of the war in Syria in 2011, more than over 1 million like came or registered refugees arrived to Jordan. Of which like 425,000 people just settled in Amman. And like most of these refugees, like as we can see, they are like vulnerable, they kind of like seek living in poor areas with deteriorated access to kind of like basic services or livelihood opportunities. And as a result, that kind of like increased like the social tension here, and also due to the original like lack of basic services, and also the perception that like the flux of refugees like cause kind of like a fluctuation in rents and prices of like goods and services. On the other hand, like in Jordan in general, there's a lack of safe, inclusive public spaces and open green areas. And we've noticed also like during like the past few months during COVID-19, like the importance of public space was re-emphasized like for both like the physical and the mental well-being of like the vulnerable, both like Jordanians and refugees at the same time, especially during like the lockdown time. Our project, like the starting point for our project was like built on the priorities that they were identified in the Amman migration profile that was published like during like the first phase of the MC2CM actions. And in particular, like the second and the third priorities, like the community services, there's a need for community services for migrants and social cohesion. And also there's a need for training municipalities, employees with focused orientation on vulnerable communities in highly populated areas.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm very happy, and it's very interesting and important for the MC2CM to know that we have synergies between the different components of the MC2CM project, and that means building the actions on top of the publications, which is the city migration profile of Amman. I would like to tell the participants that we are linking, posting the links in the chat box in case any of them would like to go to the published document of the city migration profile and have a look at the needs of that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fatma. It's important to build synergy on all the actions, like of what MC2CMR is doing, and also what are like other like priorities and actions that are also identified in the country itself. And that's the importance of our partnership as well with the Greater Amman municipality as a key partner for our work here in Amman. During the preparation for this project, we also have identified like a set of challenges, which, as I mentioned, like in particular in Amman, there's a lack of accessible and safe public spaces. So the residents here enjoy 2.5 square meters of park areas per capita compared to the international standards, which is like 9 square meters. So we see the big difference in the availability of public spaces. And also, like we saw that public spaces here are considerable kind of like places for social tension, where social tension takes place, and many kind of like cases of harassment. So that's also another kind of like issue that need to be tackled. The influx of refugees is exacerbating like the existing vulnerability, and also increases like the social tension and compromises and kind of like social cohesion. And as mentioned in the priorities of the report, like the capacity of the municipality to design and implement safe and inclusive public space in a participatory manner, like to include like the community in the design and implementation process, that also need to be strengthened. So accordingly, we designed this project basically to foster like social cohesion between the refugees and Jordanians through the rehabilitation of a public space in the Marka neighborhood, which is one of the really most populous neighborhoods in East Amman. And our idea that the public space will basically be designed and rehabilitated in a participatory manner, where the representatives from both like the host community and the refugees will be engaged in several activities throughout the process. The main objective of this project is basically to improve like safe and inclusive access to public spaces in Amman, pave the way for cultural exchange, tolerance, and willingness to sustain dialogue, and help reduce social tension between like the Syrian refugees and the local communities. And the specific objectives here is one is to reflect the needs and priorities of the different groups in the community. We talk about women, children, people with disabilities, like elderly, in the design of the public space, to create like a safe and accessible and inclusive public space that improves also the attractiveness of the area and empowers the local community, to encourage also cultural exchange and foster a sense of belonging and identity, and also to build the capacity of the Greater Amman municipality and the key stakeholders on how we can design safe and inclusive public space so they can replicate the process in the future. Who are our targeted group in this action? As I mentioned, our key partner is the Greater Amman municipality. We are targeting the refugees, in particular like the Syrian refugees, which they count like around 11.8% of the residents in Marka neighborhood, in addition to Palestinians, Egyptians, and other nationalities living in the neighborhood. Women in particularly, and we saw like increase in the gender-based violence during COVID-19 and the lockdown. So also this is one of our target group. Youth, and we see that like the population here is a kind of like a young population, where 23% of the communities are like between 15 and 24 years old. And it's important like to include like people with disabilities. And it happened that next to the location, the site that we selected for this project, there's a handicap like a center called Al Wafa. And it is literally located on the edge of the park, but unfortunately without any access for this park. So we thought this is important to include them in this process.
Of course, it's very important to include the vulnerable groups, and especially women, youth, little girls, and the disabled. How are you translating those very important objectives into actions? So but I would like to remind you that we are very tight with the time here, and I know that it's a long presentation, so
No, I'll be very brief and quick. And
sure,
if you have any question, we can tackle them at the end.
of
So
course, thank
the
you.
design of our project is basically built on three key components. Like the first is the capacity building component. The second is like the innovative participatory tools and approach. And the third component is like the tangible intervention that will be implemented on the ground. And from these like three components, we identified the following outputs for the projects. Like first is like building the capacity of GAMs, as I mentioned earlier. Also kind of like enhancing like the awareness and the civic participation kind of like of female and male youth, like local and refugees in general. Reflecting like the needs of the local community in the public space through innovative participatory tools, which I will elaborate more in a minute about them, and developing like at the end like safe and accessible public space in a gender responsive manner, and at the end like emphasize on like the social interaction and dialogue between like local community and Syrian refugees in the neighborhood. Our planned activities in the projects are comprised of like the following. First, to conduct capacity building, to conduct like a regional workshop on localizing like a public space toolkits for the Arab states, conduct participatory block by block Minecraft workshop to design the public space, have like a painting activity with the local community, and engage the community in the construction process afterwards. Have it like an advocacy campaign with the local community inside like the public space, produce like a video documenting the whole experience, and develop like an operation and maintenance plan jointly with the Greater Amman municipality, like for the maintenance of the public space afterwards, and establish a local committee to guarantee that the maintenance of the public space is done, and to also build their like sense of ownership. So far, we have managed to kind of like conduct the first three activities, and I will give you a very brief explanation on what we have done so far. In terms of like the block by block Minecraft workshop, for those who are not aware of the Minecraft game, which is kind of like a computer game, like a Lego, but like it's a digital Lego inside like the computer. And with the assistance of the Global Public Space Program at UN Habitat headquarters, we kind of utilize this tool to engage the youth in the design of like the public space. So we launched kind of like a call for the youth who is interested to participate in this workshop, and we got like 23 kind of interest from like youth, both like boys and girls, like from Jordanians, Syrians, Egyptian, like people who are living in the area. And we started by kind of like visiting the site, engaging them in the like assessment of what really the site needs, like what are like the things that are lacking in the sites from their perspective, what are like the important features to understand, like here, like where the entrance is, where like the main roads, what are like the existing vegetation that we want to protect, what are the things that need to be replaced or added to it, so that to have a better understanding of the real site before going into the game and then starting adding their kind of like designs. Also in the interim, we have created like the site in the game itself. As you can see on the screen, that's like the model on the right of the site that we are working on. And over 3 days workshops, we started the first day by giving these kind of like participants like basic principles. What does it mean to have a good like public space? What are like the features that should be inside like the public space in terms of like safety, in terms of lighting, in terms of shading, in vegetation, like areas that kind of like cater for the different members, the accessibility, like whether for disabled or for elderly or mothers with like prams. So all of these principles, we kind of like try to bring their attention to them, and then we gave them kind of like introduction to the game, because most of them they didn't know how to play it before, but they were really smart and they picked it up very quickly. And we started like after that, like we switched them to the location, that the site that is created in the game, and they started designing their like ideal, let's say, garden and public space. And in the last day, the groups, like they presented their ideas and shared it with their colleagues. And during the presentations, we did kind of like a prioritization. So we see what are like the most elements that they kind of like repeated by different groups, and everybody agreed that they need them to be inside like the park. And that give us indication what we should include when we kind of translate the design, their ideas into actual design that will be implemented on the ground. So as you see, in total, we had like 22 participants from Jordanians, Syrians, Egyptians, males, females, people with disability. I have to say something important here, that including like people with disability in the process actually was very helpful, because it raised awareness for the other kids about the importance of accessibility, things that they take for granted, but they never paid attention that other people might struggle with it. So it was really very interesting interaction between the participants and exchange of like experiences as well. The second activity that we conducted was like the regional workshop, also in July, end of July, to localize like the public space toolkit that was developed by UN Habitat headquarters into the Arab states. And this workshop, like the main objectives was basically to understand like the current situation and identify the challenges from a regional and local perspectives for what is quality public spaces here for our countries and regions, to localize like the global public space toolkit to the Arab state context, and also include like some case studies from the region, to link like the public space cases in the Arab region to also what is agreed upon in the agendas 2030 and the new urban agendas, and to provide practical tools and good practices to regional practitioners and local government officials into how to improve like accessibility, safety, inclusivity of public space at the citywide level, and to identify specifically for Jordan, like what are the challenges facing public spaces, and especially with the Greater Amman municipality, and to build the capacity of the MC2CM partners here. We are talking about the Greater Amman municipality and like Housing and Urban Development Corporation, to better respond to the identified challenges, and to provide them with the tools that can be utilized later on. The workshop was held like combination of like a virtual and face-to-face kind of like participations because of like the situation. So we have the participants from Jordan, kind of they were hosted at a hall in the Greater Amman municipality, and we had a number of virtual participants from the region, and there were like different presentations that presented, and also there were some interactive exercises with the participants to try to understand better what is the definition of public space in the Arab regions, what are the tools that are applicable in our regions and that are useful for us. And at the end of a second day, like the participants like came out with a set of recommendations, and like that can be kind of the next step, let's say, to build on them, which is basically there's a need like to work on a cultural shift for like attitudes of Jordanian community towards public space. There's a need to strengthen like the partnership, especially between like the public and private sectors in the especially investment in public spaces. There's a need to kind of like strengthen like the participatory process in order to include like the community in the planning process of their neighborhood. And also there is a need to improve like the maintenance mechanisms, because you design the public spaces and then everybody complains that they are neglected and there's no maintenance by different institutions, and also to include the community in the process. And also the last recommendation was that there's a need to develop and customize the toolkit for the creation and improvement of safe and accessible public spaces in Jordan. In total, we had like 80 participants who attended like both physically and virtual from different institutions, local authorities, academia, civil society. So it was really diversified audience in this workshop.
If I may ask you, Dr. Lubna, I could see from the photos that you presented that those activities were conducted during the COVID, right?
No, we were safe.
How was the impact? I know, it's very obvious actually, but I just want to know what was the impact of COVID-19 on the overall implementation of the project?
COVID-19 is also a challenge, like for the implementation of the project as elsewhere around the world at the moment. First, like for example, in terms of like the number of participants with the Minecraft workshop with the youth, we had to kind of split them into two different rooms, like in order to kind of like have the participants like enough distance between them, which kind of like was a little bit of challenge in terms of the practicality and the technicality, especially if we have the trainers are providing an online training, like sitting in headquarters in Nairobi, and like to kind of manage two rooms at the same time. And so that was a little bit, but we were able to kind of like accommodate that. And that also applies on the regional workshops. We originally, when the project was designed, the idea was to host these kind of like participants from the Arab world in Amman, and they all come here and we have like a actual kind of like workshop where everybody presents. But you know, like when you have like the situation, many people, of course, no one managed to even come, not even the speakers. So putting people to sit for like a long day in front of the screen and keep them focused, that was like one of the challenges, to be honest. But like I honestly like I was very impressed with the participants who came also to the venue itself, that they were able to sit and to also kind of follow up the presentation, the online presentation. That was like basically a challenge. And now also like the implementation, like in the site, that will be another kind of like challenge in the coming period. But we are trying to find ways to kind of mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on the project here.
Of course, we trust you with overcoming those challenges, which we are all facing, like the mobility and the travel and management online of different activities.
Yeah.
So what is the impact of all of those planned and conducted activities on the overall context now?
Sure. The impact of this action is actually like as we kind of like envisaged it, that the rehabilitation of the park at the end will result in like a social, economic, and environmental benefits for the residents of Marca. And also it will help in kind of like alleviate the social tension between like the host communities and the refugees. It will foster kind of like social cohesion and interaction between the community, both like the host community and like the refugees. And it will build kind of like a sense of belonging and ownership because they participated in the design and development of the public space. It will encourage dialogue and economic kind of like opportunities by holding cultural activities and exchange in the venue. They have a venue by now. It will enhance like the community's role in the society by giving them opportunity to voice their needs. Now they kind of learn how to participate and contribute in the implementation of the process. It will provide also Greater Amman municipality with the necessary tool to replicate and expand the impacts of this project across Amman. And also it will improve like the attitudes and behaviors related to refugees, women, girls, to enjoy like public space through the social interaction of the local community and the social and the Syrian refugees. One thing, the last thing I would like to mention, and it is important to see the catalytic impact of this intervention, because since we started like with this project, and we had also kind of like discussions with our like colleagues and other sister UN agencies, we managed to kind of like encourage UNDP to also build on these interventions and install like LED lighting in the park, also to promote kind of like energy efficient like streets and parks as part of their sustainable urbanization and resource efficiency for Amman project. So now they will implement it in the same site. So kind of like that will scale up like the intervention. And also this initiative kind of like triggered new initiatives led by Greater Amman municipality, and maybe Engineer Siham can elaborate more, in cooperation with like German municipalities to kind of retrofit the existing community center into a green building. So this is where we see the complementarity and the catalytic impact of such interventions. And we hope in the future we can build more and more on this type of work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lubna. Before I go to Engineer Siham, I would like to point out, first of all, that this project, as I can see, is targeting or addressing different sustainable development goals, right? So one of them, as you just said, is reinforcing the international cooperation between the different stakeholders of migration to benefit the local municipalities and to have a bigger impact at the local level. It's very important. What was, from your perspective, the role of the municipality of GAM, Greater Amman municipality, in implementing the action?
Actually, they are like a great partners from us from day one. They were really like helping us, facilitating every step of the project. They helped us in selecting the site. Also during like the workshops that were designed, like they provided us like with the venues. They kind of give all their like IT support or technical, like everything kind of like to facilitate the implementation of the project was done perfectly by the colleagues at GAM. And it's really like we work as partners, and that's what kind of like the strength in this project. And like GAM like is a key actor in this project, and without them we couldn't even like do anything. So I have to thank them now on behalf of UN Habitat, like, and we have to keep always like say that.
I would like to thank them, of course. They are a very, very important partner of MC2CM, and they are from the first cities built within the network of MC2CM from phase 1. I would like also to point out that we had an interview within the MC2CM context with the mayor of GAM, Dr. Yusuf Al-Shawarbi, and we want to share with you the links to see the very important and the really impressive. I can see that the team has linked it to in the chat box. It was an impressive interview, and I was very honored to have it with him. Engineer Siham Al-Hadidi, welcome, and thank you for being with us. How would you tell us, what would you tell us actually about the impact of such actions on the migration context in Amman, and how is this cooperation benefiting the local context?
بالبداية مساء الخير للجميع الحضور والمشاركين، وبشكرك دكتورة لبنى على كلمات الشكر. احنا ما عملنا إلا واجبنا. وجودكم معنا كان مؤثر بصورة إيجابية علينا احنا كفريق تصميم وعلى المجتمع المحلي إن شاء الله. الأثر راح يكون كبير بإذن الله. هلا أكيد الهجرات بأنواعها سواء القسرية أو الاختيارية بتشكل صدمة عند كل مهجر، وهي الصدمة بدك تعالجها. هلا معالجتها سواء من الناحية الثقافية ولا الاجتماعية ولا الاقتصادية في إلها ناس كتير تتدخل فيها. من الناحية الاجتماعية احنا كأمانة عمان عندنا دور ما بنقدر نقوم فيه لحالنا. أكيد مؤسسات المجتمع المدني بتساعد بخبراتها. احنا يمكن عندنا الخبرات الفنية والهندسية للقيام بتصميم منشآت أو فراغات حضرية، لكن الإدماج الاجتماعي إحنا بحاجة لخبرات المؤسسات المجتمع المدني بهذه العملية، كيف بتتم وكيف بتآلف الناس بين بعض سواء السكان المحليين أو المهجرين. والفائدة الثالثة اللي إحنا سمعناها برضو من الدكتورة لبنى مشاركة ذوي الاحتياجات الخاصة كمان، فصار المستوى التشاركية على مستوى أكبر كمان، مش بس بنحكي على مهجرين وسكان، عم نحكي على أطفال من ذوي احتياجات خاصة وأطفال طبيعيين يحسوا بزملائهم أو بالأفراد الآخرين شو عم بيعانوا ليوصلوا للفراغ الحضري اللي بدهم يشتركوا فيه أو يشاركوا فيه. أكيد أي تحسين على علاقة المهجر مع البيئة بتساعده على الصمود، بتساعده على إنه يندمج مع المجتمع، بتساعده إنه يوقف على رجليه، إنه يكون آمن في المكان اللي هو فيه، ما يحسش إنه غريب. وهذا الحكي حسيناه من مشاركة الأطفال بورش العمل، كانوا كتير إيجابيين. وكانوا أطفال برضو، الأطفال اللي من المجتمع المحلي برضو كان في تفاعل إيجابي. وبعتقد الدكتورة لبنى يمكن أكثر حدا هي كانت موجودة معظم الوقت. إحنا يمكن شاركنا بالفعاليات هاي بصورة بسيطة جدا، ما كانش عندنا الوقت يسمح لنا إنه نشارك فيها على اليومين كله، بس بالتأكيد دور مؤسسات المجتمع المدني بالتشارك مع أمانة عمان رح تأثر إيجاباً على صمود هدول الفئات وهدول الأطفال وتجاوبهم مع المجتمع اللي هن عايشين فيه لحين عودتهم بإذن الله إلى بلادهم آمنين مطمئنين. وإن شاء الله قريباً يعني بنسمع أخبار طيبة عن سوريا وعن جميع بلداننا العربية اللي إحنا بالأردن إحنا بنستقبلهم هون كأخواننا وكجزء من مجتمعنا. بس بالتأكيد الواحد ما بحس بالأمان إلا في بيته وفي وطنه. إحنا مستعدين نكون دائما مع مؤسسات المجتمع المدني بأي مساعدة ممكن تساعدنا إحنا كمان. يعني إحنا بنساعدهم ليساعدونا بصراحة. يعني لما نأمن الفينيوز مشان تعمل هاي ورش العمل هي أولا بناء لقدرات موظفينا ومهندسينا إنهم يقدروا يتعاملوا مع مشاريع مستقبلية بنفس الصورة. نقدر نعيد هذه التجربة بمواقع ثانية يمكن إحنا كنا معهم شوية. هلا الأطفال يمكن أسرع منا بالتعلم كثير وأذكى منا على الشاشات وعلى الكمبيوترز. لما بلشنا نجرب اللعبة مع بورشة العمل لبناء القدرات شوية إحنا تخربطنا. الصغار لا كانوا كثير أسرع منا وكانوا أصلاً بيعرفوا اللعبة ومتعلمين عليها يعني دخلوا على طول بالتصميم. فنتأمل إنه التجربة هاي تتكرر. نتأمل إنه نكون المرة الجاي إحنا كأمانة عمان نعيدها ولأنها هي بالنسبة لنا كمان هي مساعد إنه نستديم هذه المواقع. أنت لما تصممي الحديقة كمصمم مهندس لحالك بدون ما ترجع للناس أكيد بيكون في دور هيك في حلقة مفقودة بين المصمم وبين المستخدم. لما يكون المستخدم نفسه هو عم يشارك بعملية التصميم رح يكون هو جزء من العملية ورح يتبنى الموقع ورح يحافظ عليه. إحنا يمكن حكيت أنا للدكتورة لبنى لديما عندنا مشكلة كبيرة باستدامة المواقع والفراغات الحضرية والحدائق العامة. موضوع التخريب والإساءة بالعبث لهذه المواقع كتير مؤثر علينا وعم نصرف على صيانة الحدائق أكثر ما عم نصرف على إنشاء حدائق جديدة. ويمكن هذا اللي عم بيأثر على زيادة المساحات الخضراء عندنا في مدينة عمان. مستقبلا بإدماج الناس ومشاركتهم معنا ممكن يحسن هاي العملية ويخفف من مصاريف الصيانة والاستدامة ونرجع إنه إحنا نقدر نعمل حدائق زي ما كنا قبل 10 سنين و15 سنة. كنا ننشأ بالسنة 10 ل 12 حديقة. هلا إحنا مبدئيا مع ارتفاع الأسعار والغلاء والظروف المعيشية اللي عم تعيشها العالم كله والكوفيد كتير في تراجع بنسب الصرف على هيك مشاريع. في اشياء صارت اولويات وفي اهم. بس احنا بالنسبه لنا الفراغات الحضريه وانا كلاندسكيب اركتكت بدايه قبل ما اكون مدير دراسات وتصميم كثير بيهمني ازيد الفراغات الحضريه في المدينه لاني بعرف قديش الناس بحاجتها. احنا جربنا بفتره الكوفيد قد ايه كانت الفتره صعبه علينا كلنا خاصه ايام الحجر لما اضطرينا نقعد في بيوتنا شهر تقريبا بدون ما اكثر من شهر حتى بدون ما نخرج برا البيوت الا لشراء بعض الحاجيات. بيوتنا صارت بالنسبه لنا زي السجن الصغير لانه تفتقد الى الفراغات الخضراء. يعني مش كل واحد ساكن في بيت في حديقه وبيقدر يطلع عليها. معظمنا ساكنين في شقق سكنيه في عمارات سكنيه. اقرب حديقه له يمكن تكون على بعد 500 ومرات اكثر 500 متر ومرات اكثر من كيلو. فكان صعب انك توصلها. لا انك تنشر هذه الفراغات الحضريه في المدينه كثير مهم لنا للمستقبل وللايام اللي جايه لانه عارفين انه احنا يمكن هاي الكوفيد يستمر هلا سنه وسنتين ما بنعرف. بس في اشياء ثانيه رح تيجي. فالفراغات الحضريه رح تساعد الناس انها تخرج من الضائقه النفسيه اللي هي فيها. تفرغ شويه الطاقات السلبيه اللي عم تعيشها وهي موجوده داخل البيت.
شكرا جدا مهندسة سهام. ليس جديد اكشلي على جام. هلا بدي احول من الانجليش للعربي بس منه جديد على بلديه عمان الكبرى انه تعتبر من اهم المبادرات اللي هي بدها تقوم فيها هي تحط التركيز على الأطفال والمجتمع المحلي واستدامة النتائج. وهي من أهم شيء نحن نحكي فيه ب MC2CM وهو مش بس يكون عندنا مبادرات إنما أيضا يكون عندنا استدامة لنتائجها. أنا قبل ما أختم عندي لك سؤال أو ما بعرف يمكن دكتور لبنى هل كان في أو عندكم هلأ صعوبات معينة بالوصول إلى منظمة المجتمع المدني والمهاجرين لحتى نعمل معهم أي من الأنشطة؟
السؤال لي ولا للدكتورة لبنى؟ الصعوبات ما في صعوبات. احنا بالنسبه لنا كأمانة عمان، احنا أمانة عمان بنتقبل اي مبادره بتيجي من اي مؤسسات مجتمع مدني، وعندنا كثير مبادرات ومشاركات يعني هلا في حاليا شغل مع الجي اي زد، اليو ان هابيتات، اليو ان دي بي. ما ابدا ما عندنا اي باب مغلق، دائما احنا قلوبنا مفتوحه وافكارنا وعقلنا مفتوح لاي مبادره ممكن تخدم المدينه وتخدم الناس. ممكن تكون حتى مرات في تنسيق مشترك بين كل المؤسسات المجتمع المدني اللي عم تدخل على مبادرات لأمانة عمان. وزي ما حكت الدكتورة لبنى قبل شوي، يعني حديقة فاطمة الزهراء تحديداً فيها أكثر من مبادرة. فيها مبادرة مع بلدية دريسدن لتأهيل المبنى ليصير مبنى أخضر، في مبادرة مع اليو ان دي بي مشان موضوع الإنارة والليد، والمبادرة مع اليو ان هابيتات. فكلهم يعني كأمانة عمان بننسق مع كل الجهات لنطلع بمبادرة متكاملة لموقع واحد أو أكثر من موقع. مع الجي اي زد عم نشتغل على مجموعة من المشاريع في منطقة بسمان، في منطقة النصر، واحنا في صدد هلا، او الجي اي زد طرحوا العطاءات وهلا في قيد التنفيذ ان شاء الله، وراح ترى النور قريبا. فدائما احنا قلوبنا مفتوحه وبابنا مفتوح لاي مبادره ممكن تخدم المدينه وتساعدنا بتأدية خدماتنا المطلوبه منا للمدينه، سواء على صعيد الخدمات الاساسيه في المدينه او الاجتماعيه او الثقافيه.
شكرا. دكتور لبنى، عندك اي شيء تزيديه؟
أنا بس بتفق مع المهندس زهام، يعني إحنا كل شغلنا هو مبني على الشراكات، شراكات مع مؤسسات المجتمع المدني، شراكات مع الحكومة المحلية، شراكات مع المؤسسات المختلفة، أو مع حتى اللوكال NGOs. يعني أي حدا يعني إحنا بنتقاطع معه بالشغل، يعني أكيد إنه في عنا هذا التعاون. وزي ما بنحكي يعني بالعربي، إيد واحدة ما بتزقف. ففي النهاية لازم كلنا نتعاون مع بعض، وين في فرصة للتعاون أكيد لازم إحنا نبني عليها، وهذا طبيعة شغلنا يعني.
أكيد أكيد. أنتوا عم تحكوا باستدامة النتائج، وأنا عم أفكر ممكن نستعمل الحديقة لأنشطة لرفع الوعي حول أهمية هيدي الحدائق، وحول أهمية لأنه لتخلق self of belonging أو ownership للمجتمع. لازم يحسوها هيدا الشيء منهم ولإلهم، ولازم يحافظوا عليه. فممكن كمان نعمل أنشطة معينة later on نقدر نفكر فيها كمشروع الهجرة بين المدن المتوسطية، أمانة عمان واليو ان هابيتات بالشراكة ثلاثتنا، إذا فينا نطور هيدا المشروع بمرحلة تانية أخرى حسب كمان النتائج اللي بتطلع عندهم. أنا بدي أشوف بس إذا عنا أسئلة. مدام نانسي القعقاع اللي هي الفوكل بوينت لمشروع الام سي 2 سي ام بامانه عمان الكبرى، عم تقلنا نعمل في امانه عمان على مشاريع مشابهه في هذا المجال، من ناحيه تاهيل وتصميم الفراغات الحضريه ومشاركه المجتمعات المحليه في مجال التشاركيه، ومن ناحيه الادامه بعد التنفيذ، ونحن على اتم الاستعداد للمساعده وتبادل الخبرات في هذا المجال.
زميلتنا نانسي مدير مشروع الكاش فور وركس مع الجي اي زد، فهي عندها كمان شغاله على مشروع لتاهيل فراغات حضريه بمساعده المهاجرين ان شاء الله، وقريبا ان شاء الله رح يرى النور بعض من هذه المشاريع
ان شاء الله ان شاء الله. شكرا لكم على حضوركم وعلى البرزنتيشن. شكرا دكتور لبنى، شكرا انجينير سهام. حضرة المشاركين بنشوفكم، أو let's switch to English. So to all participants, we see you next week inshallah on Friday at 12 again to present another MC2CM Targeted City Action webinar. Thank you and see you next week.
شكرا.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.